Next up, we're in for a real treat. Geoffrey Canada is going to be speaking about his work. 20 years ago, Geoffrey founded the Harlem Children's Zone. Now, anybody who is interested in the cause of youth, the cause of education, or just even lives in New York, looks at Geoffrey as a real hero. And the work that he's done is just so unbelievably remarkable. He's an author, a visionary, but somebody who's really dedicated his life to bettering the lives of young people living on the streets of Harlem. And I can't resist the urge to also note that I believe Geoffrey is a third-degree black belt in karate or taekwondo, even better. Please join me in welcoming Geoffrey Canada.
Well, I am absolutely thrilled to be here, and I was really worried about what to wear because they said everything was casual, and I thought, I bet Will.i.am is going to wear just what he wants to wear, and I'm not going to be able to touch that, so I'm going to just wear my regular clothes up here and be happy. It's been, that was just brilliant, by the way, and lots of things sparked in my mind. But we've had an incredible year because a number of different forces have come together to, I think, support our work. We've had the 60 Minutes. We've done 60 Minutes 2 times. We've got a book that Paul Tufts wrote called Whatever It Takes. The American Express decided they were going to do a commercial and sort of highlight our work. The President of the United States put $200 million in a budget to replicate our work in 20 different places around the country. And I have really been excited to see a collection of businesses and politicians and other folk come together around some of the things that I care about. I have to tell you one thing, though, about 60 Minutes, right? So I've done 60 Minutes 2 times. And I grew up, now this is a young audience, and I'm not young, but I grew up watching 60 Minutes because in the late 60s, early 70s, if you were a social justice person, the place you went to every Sunday to see justice was 60 Minutes. And it was the same format forever, right? Sunday would come on, you'd have some scoundrel, right? He was polluting the rivers. He would come on 60 Minutes. Mike Wallace would be interviewing him, and I would sit there and think, why do they go on 60 Minutes? It's not like it's a surprise. The same format every Sunday. So the guy's on 60 Minutes, he's saying, no, Mike, my company never pollutes the rivers. And right in the middle of that, Mike Wallace would like whip out the picture of the guy dumping sludge into the river, right? And I would sit there and say, why do these idiots go on 60 Minutes? Then they called me. So I did say, the second time I did it, I did it with Anderson Cooper. I did say to Anderson, I said, Anderson, we say, okay, we're going to start. I said, wait, Anderson. Look, if you've got something, could we just get to it right away? Right? Don't drag this thing out. So I thought if you needed to get a message to America, right, the place you needed to go on was 60 Minutes because 20 million viewers are hard news format, right? I was wrong. Do you know whose show you have to do if you really want to get a message out to America? Oprah. Oprah, I was totally sleeping. Oprah, I mean, I know Oprah, everybody knows Oprah, but I didn't have a clue. This is how I got my first clue. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to do 60 Minutes, I say to my wife and kids, oh, I'm doing 60 Minutes. Say, oh, great, Dad, have a great time. I say, oh, I'm going to the White House, the president went, oh, yeah, oh, great, say hi to the First Lady for us, right? Like nothing. Right? So I'm sitting around the dinner table, I say, oh, I'm going to Chicago next week, I'm going to do Oprah. And they said, Oprah? You? Like, what would Oprah want with you, right? And I was sitting there, and I said, yes, I'm going to do Oprah. And they said, well, did you get tickets? And I'm looking at them, now it doesn't even occur to me, right? I'm like, tickets, I call Marty, my communication guy. I say, look, Marty, call the Oprah folks, see if you can get me some tickets. Oprah does the worst thing possible. She gives me 7 tickets. Now look, if Oprah gives me 2 tickets, right, that's my wife and my mother. 7 everybody in your family thinks they're in the top 7, right? So my whole family is like, we're going to Oprah. I'm like, no, you're not. So if you ask yourself, I say, so Jeff, what is it? Why do you want to go and get on these shows? I am convinced, without a shadow of a doubt, that our nation's very future is imperiled. I don't have a doubt about this. If our country continues to do what it has been doing, because everyone's innovating except in one place. Education is not innovating at all. There's a group of educators who have no intention of changing anything around how our children learn, despite what's happening in the rest of the world. And our country is absolutely in peril. Now, I know people say, well, Jeff, that's a little hyperbole. How bad could this thing be? Well, in some places, it's really clear what's going on. You know, the Schott Foundation just put out a report on the graduation rates as high school, African-American males, less than 50%. Some places, 75% of the kids, African-American males, aren't graduating from high school. I'm talking about from high school. I'm not talking about from college, I'm talking about from high school. Now, if you look at what happens when you don't have a high school diploma, just in general, 54% of those kids end up unemployed. You know what the rate is for African-American males? 69% unemployed, 69%. I will tell you this, you find me a place on the face of the earth that has that kind of unemployment in a group. It's just impossible to imagine. I mean, how could we be doing that? And by the way, quarter of those folks are going to be in jail. Now, here's what our nation has done. We have made a strategic decision that we are not going to educate all of our kids at very high levels, but we are going to be prepared to lock these folks up when they don't have jobs and they end up breaking the law, which is pretty straightforward line, right? No jobs, 25, 30 years, people do what they have to do, they end up in jails and prison. Do you know our country locks up more people per capita than any place on the face of the earth? No one's close to us. No one's close to us. It is staggering. Last numbers we had, 2.3 million Americans in jail. You think of the worst country. You think of a place that you wouldn't want to be near. You start thinking about North Korea, not even close. What's it costing the nation? Last numbers we had, about $68 billion, adult correction. So here, you know, I had this program, right? We spend about $5,000 per child. It's a huge national debate. Oh my God, Geoffrey Canada spends $5,000 a child to get these kids in college and do, you know, people tell me, and it's honest. They say, Jeff, it's not scalable. I say, that's not scalable. That is not scalable. We need a number that we can scale across country. I say, wait a second now, let me just get this. I have to end up in a lot of criminal courts because of what happens with my kids. And I have yet to be in a court where I've seen a judge say to a kid, look, Raheem, look, this is your second armed robbery. I told you what was going to happen. Now, we're going to have to send you away for 10 years. But let's see, at $35,000 a year, that's $350,000. You know what? I can't do that. It's not scalable. Never heard it. Never heard it. Never. So wait. So here's one part of our system that is totally scalable. We are prepared to spend 10 years, 20 years. We're prepared to spend as much money as we need to keep Raheem locked up. And no one bats an eye. And what are the social positive outcomes we get from that? Nothing. Does Raheem come out able to get a job? No. Does he take care of his family? No. Is he able to go and vote? No. We have essentially spent a fortune to produce nothing. And we are totally comfortable doing that all over this country. Everybody, no one blinks an eye. And now, you've got me out here yelling, we ought to stop. We know where the Raheems are. They've been in the same places for 50 years. We know it by the block. We know it by the projects. We know exactly where this is going on. And you know what's going on there? Those folk are not getting an education. They are simply not getting an education. They can't come out and compete. So we have a small little thing we think we ought to do as a nation, which is to educate our children. We ought to educate them. We ought to realize that this is a globally competitive market we're preparing American children for, and we're going to pay for these kids one way or the other. It's not like we cannot do the investment and then we end up like, well, we'll just save all that money and do something else. We're going to spend that money regardless. And so we thought we ought to do this. Now, you know what? I thought, because of how I grew up, that, you know, I wasn't going to get Americans to understand that. People who were not in my business. I just honestly thought, I don't care. I haven't convinced them that they ought to get involved in this. It's messy work. People are unsure about what the outcomes are. But over the years, I've been at the same job for going on 28 years. I've found that you can unite people in this country around certain kinds of issues if people know there's a crisis and there's something that needs to be done. I mean, Matt Blink, one of my board members, is here, the president of Showtime Networks. Matt was his company is one of the first companies where they came in and Matt said, Jeff, I'm in. Whatever we can do to help in this effort, we're going to do. I believe that it is in the nation's best interest to solve this problem. Why? Okay, so it was, Jeff, I understand it's African-American kids and it's Latino kids and, you know, that's a problem, but you're making this into a national crisis. This is interesting. You ever get something and you read it and you say, well, that can't be true. That happens every now and then. I get some information and I read it, I say, well, that can't be true. Someone gave me this report. It's called Ready, Willing, and Unable to Serve. Signed, the authors are top militaries, 43 of the top retired military people in the United States. You've got generals and lieutenant generals and vice admirals and major generals and rear admirals and brigadier generals, and it goes on and on and on, all of the folk who sign on to this. And what is the basic thesis of this? 75% of young adults cannot join the military. Now, I got that report. I said, wait a second, what did you say? Did you just say 75% of young adults cannot? Did you say black kids? They said, no, we're not talking black kids. Did you say Latino kids? They said, no, we're not talking Latino kids. I said, so you're telling me in America, 75% of our young people can't join the military? So, oh, yes. Now, I don't know about you, but I never thought the high benchmark that we were shooting for in America was to join the military, right? I mean, nothing wrong with joining the military. I just never thought that was a standard that we were shooting for, and you're telling me that, so I didn't believe it. I said, that data's got to be wrong. It's not wrong. It's not wrong when you get the numbers. First, you have to graduate from high school. Well, I told you about some of those numbers. That's ugly. You're going to wipe out 30% American population right there. Then you find 30% of the folks who graduate from high school cannot pass the entrance test to get into the military. I said, okay. Now you have a felony, can't join. Oh, mentioned there was a problem in some groups with that. Then I said, well, that's still not enough people. But then to join the military, you have to be in relatively good health. I mean, you have to be able to not like run a marathon, right? But you should be able to run from this wall to that wall without needing to catch your breath, right? I mean, we have allowed our children to become so unhealthy that they cannot join. This is staggering what we've done to children in this country. It is staggering. And so the military leaders are saying, because of that, we can't even accept these kids in the military. This is a national defense crisis. If we really needed to mobilize this nation, how would we do it? Now, these folks understand there's a crisis here. They're calling for early childhood education. They're calling for investments in our young people. And I'm sitting here saying to myself, wait. Doesn't anybody else see this thing? Doesn't anybody see what's going to happen? I mean, if you love America, I love this country. But I'm not talking about in theory, you wear the flag and you do. I'm just talking about for real. If you love this country, and if you think, like everybody says, well, the children are our future. See, I really believe that. I don't mean it as a slogan. I really believe if you want to see what America's going to be in 20 years, look at where our children are right now, and you'll be scared. But see, you're probably thinking like I was thinking. I said, wait a second now. I know a lot of people love this country. The leaders aren't going to lose America. I mean, come on. I know that people have an answer to this education problem, right? Because, I mean, after all, we know a small number of folk get together and really run the world. I'm from the 60s. I just can't help myself, right? I never saw a conspiracy I didn't like. I really believe, right? I mean, I'm sitting there saying, well, I know that people aren't going to lose America, that there's a solution. It's just above my pay grade, right? So over the last 7, 8 years, I've met a few presidents, a few secretaries of education, a few secretaries of labor, directors of domestic policy. There is no plan. There is no plan. When I meet these folks, they say to me, Jeff, what do you think we ought to do? I said, you asking me? I'm here in Harlem trying to save my kids. You're running the night. Nobody knows. So if we're going to save America's children, then we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to do it. It's not like someone, I know you all are thinking, well, Jeff, isn't that your job? Oh, I'm telling you, I'm going to save my 10,000 because that's what we've decided we're going to do. And that's my capacity. I'm going to save my 10,000. But the rest of America's children are in peril unless we decide as a nation that we've got to tackle this. Now, let me tell you, I get in trouble now. This is the easy part. Everybody, when I say this, everybody says, okay, Jeff, yeah, we're with you. We hear you, man. We got to do something. Let me tell you why I get in trouble. Because if we're going to save children, then it means that we're going to have to do some things that people think that I'm really a radical when I say these kinds of things. And I hope I don't lose you here. Because I say things and people get mad at me all over the country. I say things like, if you really cannot teach and we can prove you can't teach, then you probably shouldn't teach, right? Now, I know that's radical. And there are a lot of people who think I'm an extremist for saying things like that. Right? They say, he did not just say that. Yes. I fundamentally believe that people who can't do their job should be fired. It doesn't mean they should, we shouldn't put them in chains or arrest them, but it just means they probably should find another career. Do you know that teaching is one of the few places where 98% of them cannot be fired? I don't care how well we demonstrate they're lousy for kids. You cannot fire them. You have to ask yourself, that system is great when it's working, but what if it's not working? What if it's not working and you can't get rid of folk who aren't good? What if you can't even figure out if they are any good? You talk to people, you know what the radical things are? People say, well, we ought to figure out how we can test to see whether or not you're a good teacher. It can't be done. What do you mean? Of course it can be done. We figured that out in every other industry in America. You can't tell me we can't do it for teaching. There are groups of folk whose education innovation is, this is their theory, you can change anything in education you want as long as you don't change anything. And that's the deal. And we have had debates in education that have gone on for decades around these areas that allow no innovation. And I think we've got to have innovation in education. There's absolutely no reason. There is no reason that this, which is a huge, huge industry, by the way. We're not talking a minor industry. We're talking a huge industry, that in this huge industry, we don't have competition. This is education. This is because I'm old, y'all are young. Y'all don't know about this stuff. I was one of the first kids when I was in high school to have a computer delivered to their high school. They had to bring this thing in a Mack truck, right? I'm serious. The computer went from here over to here, right? And I thought, you see how smart I am. So you had to type these cards, right? You had to punch in these cards, and we used a language no one ever heard of called Fortran. And you'd use that language, and you'd punch in all of this stuff. It took you about an hour and a half. You'd load the cards in a deck. It would spit out all the cards, and the computer would tell you what 9 times 27 was, right? And I sat there and said, this is not going anywhere. I'm not investing any money in this thing here. This has no future, right? So what did I know? Right? But y'all know I'm being serious. I'm being serious. Now, just imagine where we are from there. Getting the phones. I can't even say in the phone. People's toasters, they have more computing power than we had back there in '68. education has not innovated one iota in all of that time. The same way we ran school when I was a child and when my mother was a child is the same way we run school today. We have not done one thing different. If it was up to educators, we would still be having those big clunky computers, right? That's where we would be. Now, how is that allowed? How is that allowed? So I think, we've got to shake this system up. We've got to go out and we've got to get innovation. And the thing is, when you innovate in education, people do charter schools. Say, oh yeah, the charter schools are there are a lot of lousy. Yeah, a lot of lousy charter schools. Close them down. It didn't work. They tried some stuff. It didn't work. Right? Guess what? That happens in life. Right? It's sort of how it goes. Right? If you don't do well, you kind of go out of business. Every place except in education. So my belief is, let's allow innovation to flourish. Here's a radical idea. We ought to hold people accountable. If you take the money, you ought to deliver a product that's good and that has quality to it. When I talk of, here's another thing people don't like before, because we started our school. I told our mayor, I told my board, Matt and everybody, and I told the community, if I don't have a better school in 5 years than the other public schools in Harlem, I'm going to fire myself. I said it. People wrote it. Jeff said, what's the date? Jeff said he's going to fire himself. When everybody left, I got my team there. I said, but I just want you all to know I'm the last one leaving, right? Let's just be clear. Let's just be clear. All of us have some skin in the game here, right? This is not something you can just do and accept. Can you imagine if failure was okay? I know it's incomprehensible for a lot of people in here. Just imagine if there was no penalty for failure. Just imagine if you could fail for 25 years and we could prove it and we could demonstrate it and yet not one thing happened. Not one. I say educators. I was at the Harvard Ed School. I know my school's going to be mad at me, right? They actually told us that teaching was so hard, you could only do it about 8 months a year and then you needed a lot of time off to recover, right? But you all know I'm being serious. So here it is. You're running a school. The school, you can prove it's failing. What happens? June, everybody goes? That's the end of that. So if your kids are failing, you work late? No, you may not work late. You work weekends? No, you may not work weekends. So what happens if all the kids are failing? Nothing. Tough on them. We adults collect our paychecks. We go on as if it's all good. Now look, if the nation wasn't imperiled, I wouldn't need you all. Right? We need people to care about this. We say, look, leave it to the educators. You can't leave this to the educators. We're in trouble. We're in trouble as a country, and we're going to have to do something about this. We've decided we're going to create a comprehensive strategy in Harlem. We call it the Harlem Children's Zone. We took 97 blocks. We say we're going to save those kids, and we're going to do everything. We're going to do health. We're going to do mental health. We're going to do education. We're going to do job training. We're going to guarantee our kids get into college. We're going to start at birth and stay with these kids through college. And people find that very controversial, that's what we want to do. And we're going to spend money. But that's our strategy. I don't think it's the best strategy in the world. That's the only one I know that's going to work. And you know what? We'll improve it. And if it doesn't work, we're not going to do it. We'll go out of business. That's the deal. But we've got to have real innovation in education if we're going to save this nation's children. So I'd like to end with a poem. I like to write poetry to advocates. Sometimes I get very frustrated in this work because some of the things I'm talking about are so commonsensical, but there is a huge, raging debate in America around these very basic ideas. And there are many people who see me sort of as like the Antichrist, right? He says those kind of horrible things. And some people think, oh, that Jeff is a real sort of a visionary leader. I believe that we've all got to wade in on this. So let me close with a poem I wrote that's called Don't Blame Me. The girl's mother said, don't blame me. Her father left when she was 3. I know she don't know her ABCs, her 1, 2, 3s. But I am poor and work hard, you see. You know the story, it's don't blame me. The teacher shook her head and said, "Don't blame me. I know it's sad. He's 10, but if the truth be told, he reads like he was 6 years old. And math, don't ask. It's sad, you see. Wish I could do more, but it's after 3. Blame the mom, blame society, blame the system. Just don't blame me." The judge was angry, his expression cold. He scowled and said, "Son, you've been told. Robbed with a gun, and you'll do time. You've done it again. Have you lost your mind?" The young man opened his mouth to beg. "Save your breath," he heard instead. "Your mama didn't take care of you. Your daddy left when you were 2. Your school prepared you for this fall. Can't read, can't write, can't spell at all. But you did the crime for all to see. You're going to jail, son. Don't blame me." If there is a God or a person supreme, a final reckoning for the kind and the mean, and judgment is rendered on who passed the buck, who blamed the victim, who proudly stood up. You'll say to the world, while I couldn't save all, I did not let these children fall. By the thousands, I helped all I could see. No excuses, I took full responsibility. No matter if they were black or white, were cursed, ignored, were wrong or right, were shunned, prejudged, were short or tall, I did my best to save them all. And then I can bear witness for eternity that you can state proudly, don't blame me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question.
Thank you.
Back by popular demand, I'm going to ask Jeff one quick question, and then we're going to have the treat of having him back up on the panel towards the end. Since Zeitgeist is about framing challenges and also taking action, how many people in the audience, by show of hands, hear the challenges that Geoffrey is identifying and want to know what you as individuals and your companies can do to help? Tough question to answer, but what should all these people as individuals?
This is what's interesting. I am a usual suspect, right? So when I go in and fight about these issues, people know, here comes Jeff. We know what his issue is. People honestly don't believe that other people care about this. First, they don't believe anyone knows about it. And second, they don't believe anyone cares about it. An interesting opportunity that's going to happen is Davis Guggenheim, who did Inconvenient Truth, has a new movie called Waiting for Superman. It's a documentary which is going to be opening, and it tackles these issues. And these same issues, it's going to tackle them, it's going to put this in the front of America. People wonder, what is it we can do? And this is what I'm going to say to you all, because some of it is technical and you have to get in the weeds, and some of it is really straightforward. We need innovation. We need the ability to have folk come out, try things to see if it works, get rid of what doesn't work, and then know that some things that do work, we are going to move forward these ideas. You are going to hear over the course of the next 6 months a bunch of folks try and figure out how to stop this innovation from happening, right? There are people who know this is coming and they're really, really scared. And they're going to assume that this is going to go away. I need you to connect in local communities around this issue. This is a very simple question. How did the kids do? And in lots of places you're going to find they didn't do so well. What are we going to do different? Now, at the point you ask that question, you're going to hear people, remember how I told you in education, you can change anything as long as you change nothing? And we have a whole 30 years of research and history of how to answer that question without really doing anything different than what we did last year. And so the question is, are we going to work longer for the children? And the answer will be no. And you'll ask them why, and you know what they're going to tell you? We can't. So, well, why can't we? And they're going to start talking to you about union contracts and things like that, right? It's a problem. That's the problem. Is there another answer? No, there is not. We've got to work harder. We've got to work longer. We've got to make sure we use data to drive instruction. We've got to do, and it doesn't exist except in the best. In schools that are succeeding, you don't have to worry about this. In schools that are failing, it won't exist. So I need, not me, and people know exactly where I stand on these issues. They're going to come in and say, yep, Jeff, we understand. I need regular citizens in America to ask, what are we going to do different? And not accept someone saying we're going to stay within these same lines that haven't worked for the last 50 years. So if you learn about what's going on in your local communities, if people understand this is an agenda item you care about, everyone will hear this differently. The only reason we got the cap on charter schools removed in New York State was a group of business people got together and said, we're backing this. And everybody was caught off guard. They were like, who? And you know what? They're not scared of me. They are scared of you. Sort of an interesting thing, right? You're probably thinking, well, why would they be scared of me? Because they understand the power that resides in folk who don't have a vested interest in an issue, but do it because they believe it's right. That is a very powerful force, and all the politicians and the policymakers understand that. So I need folk to be prepared to tackle these issues locally and be clear that this is something you care about. And when people understand you care about it, it allows folks like me to do my job easier. Okay, great.
Thank you, Jeff. Next up is a remarkable individual named Alberto Velimir, who I had the privilege of sitting next to at dinner last night. Let me tell you about this guy for a minute. He is the chairman and CEO of Venezuela's oldest privately owned company, which is very much a rarity in today's Venezuelan society. And just to give you an idea of how old this company is, it was actually founded the same year that George Washington was reelected president of the United States. Beyond being a prominent businessman in Venezuela, Alberto's really done something remarkable that goes against the trend of any landowner or business person in that country, which is he has founded, along with his wife, an organization called Project Alcatraz, which takes reformed criminals and works to reintegrate them into society, something for which the notion of having to socialize a society to be comfortable with taking criminals back after they've reformed is quite the undertaking. Alberto's going to talk to you about his work and some of his experiences, and I know that you all will enjoy it as much as I did last night. Alberto Velimir. Thanks.
It's going to be a tough one after Geoffrey. I should have brought some of the rum and Coke and black eyed peas. I think it would have been easier. Anyway, to begin, I just want you to picture the following situation. I want you to imagine this situation. It's 7 o'clock at night. You're in the office in this hacienda, on this property. It's, as Jared was just saying, an old property. And you're the CEO of this very well-known company. And suddenly the phone rings. It's the head of security. His name is Jimmy Perez, right? And he says, listen, I'm here with these policemen up on a hill. They're about to kill this guy. I need a red light or a green light. Okay, well, let me give you a bit of context before I continue with the story. Oops, sorry about that. Press the wrong button. Okay, a bit of context. Venezuela, as Jared was saying once again, keeping a business in Venezuela is extremely difficult. Either because the macroeconomic conditions are impossible because we've got an oil-based economy. Also, we've got Chavez who's taking over most of the private companies. I think you've read about that. But also, I think one of the main things, one of the main challenges every Venezuelan has is the insecurity levels. We've got the highest homicide rate, one of the highest homicide rates in the world. We've got the highest kidnapping rate in the world. This is just to compare Iraq with Venezuela. I don't know if you saw Newsweek's article a week or 2 weeks ago comparing the homicide rates between Iraq and Venezuela. Now, bringing it a little closer to the States, this is more or less what the homicide rates look like in the States. Ciudad Juarez, right after the big drug war, where they had many killings. Ciudad Juarez was around 133 in 2009. Caracas, these are figures from the Ministry of Interior. Caracas was 232 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. That means that compared to Caracas, Detroit is like a walk in the park. Anyway, in that context, what had happened was that these 3 gang members had actually attacked one of our security guards. They had almost killed him. They took his gun. They were about to finish him off, and then they decided, I don't know why they decided not to kill him. But anyway, our position was, if we don't do something if we don't retaliate, this is going to be a terrible message, not only to this gang, but to all the other gangs. They're going to come inside our properties, and this is going to become hell. So if you call the police isn't going to do anything about it. So I told Jimmy, ex-policeman, go after these guys, and then we'll see what we do with them when we find them. Well, what he had done, he called me up when he had the first one, and I said, nah, forget it, just give him over to the police. Well, the police, when they saw him, this was a really wanted guy. And so they said, no, we've got to kill him. We've got to bump him off. So they take him up to this hill. Jimmy goes behind them, just because he thought it was, they were playing with psychological power here. But when he realized it was going to happen, he called me up. And of course, I said no. Said, no way, red light. So anyway, that got even more difficult. He had to negotiate. At the end, he had to bribe the policeman, which is illegal, right? But bribe the policeman so they wouldn't kill the guy, which is also illegal. So, they hand him over. I told Jimmy, bring him to me. And we have this gentleman's conversation, right, without handcuffs. And at the end, we reach an agreement. I gave him 2 options. The first option was you work with no pay for 3 months to make up for what you did, or we hand you over to the police. He accepted the first option. He started working. Actually, I told him, come on Monday. If you don't appear and if you don't abide by these rules, you know what we're going to do. We know how to find you, and we'll hand you over to the police. So anyway, he starts working. A few days later, we find the second guy. The second guy happened to be the gang leader. Well, he also accepts the first option. He starts working, and after a few days, he has to have a meeting with me. So we have this meeting, and he says, listen, I'm thinking this could actually turn into an opportunity. Do you think we could give this opportunity, or you could give this opportunity to another 2 or 3 of my friends? I said, well, tell them to come on Friday. We set up a rendezvous. And actually what happened was it wasn't 2 or 3 that appeared, but the whole gang. It was 22 guys, right? And it's a little intimidating. But you have to go with the flow. You sort of go forward. You don't look back, especially not right now. And so anyway, there we decided, yeah, let's go ahead. These guys, I was thinking of what the professor was saying yesterday. Why not? I mean, these guys are giving us the most valuable asset that they actually have, which is their identity. Later, we would also find out they have the information of the whole criminal network, which is incredibly valuable. So we take them on board. They start working. And after about 2 months of working, actually what we do is we use psychological treatment. We use rugby because it's a contact sport. It's a team sport. The other thing we use is, of course, values formation and formal education, and a lot of hard work. So anyway, these guys, after 2 months, one of them stands up in a meeting and he says, listen, this is fine, but this isn't going to work. Why isn't it going to work? So, well, in a month's time, we're out of the program, and we're going to have to go back to killing if we don't want to get killed, killing the cemetery gang, which is the opposing gang. So, well, you're bringing the problem, give me a solution. They said, well, the only solution with those guys is to kill them all. They're all psychopaths, man. Huh? So anyway, they go through the descriptions of these guys. They raped their mother, this, blah, 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 all the whole story. And it was a real setback. But after a few days that we sort of rebuilt our sort of determination, I told Jimmy, Jimmy, let's go up to this place and see if, we're in this, right in the middle of this gang war, and it's one of those double or nothing situations. I think we don't really have an option. So finally, we decide to go up, and just imagine, it really sounds quite stupid. Oh, by the way, I forgot to show this was some of the gang members, but that was what happened this was more or less the faces we had in that first meeting with the 22 gang members, with the first gang. So anyway, we decide to go up. What I was saying before is try to imagine, you're in the country with the highest kidnapping rate, and you're going to go up to this slum where the police doesn't enter because in the last year they've killed 2 or 3 policemen. They've got sniper positions. It's a dangerous place. So anyway, it sounds like a very stupid thing to do, but I think we were in one of those situations where we didn't really have an option. So we start driving up to this slum, windy road. As you get further and further up the hill, you start feeling the heavy looks at you, aggressive looks, and they get even more aggressive. The road gets narrower until finally we got to a dead end, which is where the cemetery gang meets. That's where they hang out. And I remember just instance before stopping the car, I told Jimmy, you know what, Jimmy? We got to move quick. Get out of the car. When we get out of the car, let's create momentum. We have to change the game. I by the way, had told him we're going up there in our best suit and tie, right, to sort of create the change of game. So anyway, we get out of the car, and it's sort of like jumping out and giving orders to these guys that are, have the guns here, with no shirts, and they're sort of beginning to revolve around the car. They say, hey, get me a table, plug this in, hang this screen up, and so on and so forth. We were getting out with video beams and computers and stuff. And anyway, we started a presentation. In the first 3 or 4 minutes, we had about yeah, I know, I put them to sleep, but anyway. Actually, what was going on while we were doing this, everybody started curiously sort of peeking out, what the hell's going on here, right? This guy in suit and tie, these 2 guys in suit and ties. Anyway, we had about 200 people standing around us. Oh, man. Sorry about that. We had about 2 or 3 guys standing around us, 200 people standing around us. And basically what we did was we talked about the future of the county. And at the end, I decided to challenge the cemetery gang. Most of them were standing around us. And seeing if they were courageous enough to enter Project Alcatraz. As soon as I said that, they started taking out their guns and saying, "No, those sons of bitches, man, they killed my brother, they killed this, whatever." So I said, yeah, okay, so you can continue killing each other. So after this discussion, I said, take me to the gang leader's house. The gang leader had been shot up by the first gang, and he was paralyzed in bed, 3 shots in the back. And so we go to his house, and I explained to him, listen, we've got this option. It's your decision, man. You take it. It's your gang. Finally, he said, okay, let's do it. So this second gang enters. We start working with them separately until finally, one day after about 2 months, we decide to put them in one room and make them make peace. Now, what happened there was that the word spread in the rest of the region, and we started getting calls from all the gangs, prisons, so on, wanting to enter the project. Ever since, we've been recruiting those gangs. Of course, sorry, I forgot to flick these. The homicide rates have gone down dramatically in our region. And basically, we have learned 3 very important things. The first thing is always believe in people, no matter what their background is. Second, criminals are incredibly valuable for solving the criminal issue. And the third is, at least what we have found, is that in the future, in these few next years, businesses must get more involved in social transformation. So that's the story of Project Alcatraz. Thank you very much.
Save the question for when you're back up.
Excellent.
We'll have a chance to hear more from Alberto when we ask him to rejoin the panel in a little bit. There's in particular a question about role models that we're going to revisit with him. This next session is really something that's very dear to my heart, which is looking at radicalization, which is, radicalization is really, especially since 9/11, one of the largest unanswered challenges that we face. and you watch TV, you read online, you read the newspaper, and all you hear over and over again is about religion, about ideology, about madrasas, about imams, and so forth. And this really has shaped our view about what we think extremism is all about. But the question we're going to explore in this next conversation is what happens once you remove the masks of religion and ideology that are cultivated by violent extremists and really get to the root of who these young people are, why they did this, and what this is all about. Is it really about religion? Is it really about ideology? Is it about something that's far more familiar to us? Take something like gangs, for instance. Gang violence kills more people in the United States than war does. And yet, ironically, we ignore that conflict at home when compared to the conflicts abroad. Today, we're going to have really what I think might actually be the first conversation between a former gang member, Paul Carrillo, who grew up in Watts and Southgate, was a gang leader at a very young age, I think 14 or 15 years old, and has now been out of the gang for 11 years and co-founded an organization called Southern California Crossroads, where he works with another great organization called A Better LA to counter the very organizations that he used to actually be part of to get kids off the street. And then we're also going to have Maajid Nawa on stage. Maajid was a leader of a radical Islamist group called Hizb ut-Tahrir, which focuses on looking towards military coups as a way to restore the caliphate and create a global state of political Islam. Maajid was imprisoned in Egypt for 4 years and got out in 2006. When I remember this because I was working in the Bush administration at the time. Maajid's defection from Hizb ut-Tahrir shocked the world. It was the most high-profile defection from a radical Islamist group that we'd ever seen before. He founded, along with another former member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, the first think tank of former Islamists that seeks to go into the chat rooms, go into the doldrums where young people are recruited and really counter the narrative from the perspective of somebody who was part of radical Islam, saw it, didn't like it, and left and is now fighting against it. I'm pleased to welcome to the stage Maajid Nawa and Paul Carrillo.
I'll see you.
So let's get right into it. This question of what it's all about. Both of you were recruited into violent organizations, radical organizations at a very young age in very different contexts. And what I really want to get at is recruitment into a gang or recruitment into a radical Islamist group really that different? And so I want to begin with your personal stories and then tie it together. Paul, why don't you start?
Sure. Well, for me, I grew up in a very dysfunctional household. My father left when I was about 10 years old, and when he came around for about a year or two here and there, and it was just to abuse us or my mother. A lot of substance abuse at home. We lived in a low-income neighborhood. So, and then when he left, my mother started to abuse drugs and alcohol at an alarming rate after that. So, for me, I didn't want to be home, witnessing that and suffering from the abuse from my mother. So I kind of went to the streets, and that's where the gang members were. And it's kind of funny because I remember being 5 years old and despising my father's lifestyle because he was a gang member. And I hated the fact that the gang took him away from us. He ended up going to prison, committing crimes and whatnot. But when I turned 13, 14 years old, I ended up doing the same thing. How did that happen? Why did that happen? So the only logical explanation I can think of is I was looking for a way to vent, looking for a way out. And the guys on the streets accepted me and embraced me, in large part because they knew me from my relations to my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. Everybody was a gang member. And they offered support, guidance, love, respect, identity, some of the simple basic stuff that every child should have, within their household with a mother and father and a cohesive family. I didn't have, and I found that in the gang.
Mm-hmm. Maajid, how does your experience compare? I mean, were you religious growing up, or was this something that you came to?
I wasn't religious, and I would like to actually use this opportunity to try and smash a lot of the myths around Islamist radicalization. There are so many factors that Paul and I in conversation we have in similar to why I joined at 16 Hizb ut-Tahrir, but there are also things that are not similar. So I come from an educated background. I'm a law graduate. I studied Arabic. I did my master's in the London School of Economics. And I had a very agnostic childhood, and my mother raised me in a very liberal way. Most people who join Islamist organizations do not come from the mosques. They come from the background that I've come from. Let's take two most famous examples. Bin Laden is from one of the richest families in Saudi Arabia. He's an engineer. And his deputy, Ayman Zawahiri, is a doctor. He's a pediatrician from one of the most prestigious families in Egypt. But what is the similarity here is in discussions over breakfast and lunch, we've realized that I also suffered from an acute identity crisis. I was born and raised in the UK. My family is originally from Pakistan. And I was forced at a very young age, around 14, 15 years old, to watch some very, very violent racist attacks. But they weren't particularly against me. What would happen is this group called Combat 18, I suppose I can drop that brand at least on this platform. They're not in danger of becoming popular. This group used to run around the streets of my hometown, and I only had white friends because there weren't many people who looked like me from my town. But they would hold me back whilst forcing me to watch my friends get stabbed before my very eyes because they considered them blood traitors for having befriended me. So there was these very racist and violent attacks, hammer attacks on people's heads, people being stabbed multiple times. But then combined with that, there was constant police harassment. So it didn't matter that I was from a middle-class background, educated, and was trying to make something of my life. My brother was 16. He was playing with a plastic pellet gun. I was 15 years old, and an old lady saw him and decided he must be about to rob a bank. And so at 15 years old, I was arrested at gunpoint by police for suspicion of armed robbery. None of the people that attacked my friends were ever convicted, but there was me constantly being arrested and harassed by the police because at the time it wasn't, this is long before 9/11, it didn't have anything to do with Islam, but it was because of my skin color and people that assumed certain things about my background. So this made me feel very disconnected from the society where I was born, and I was in search of an identity. And in political Islam, I call it Islamism, and it's not the same as Islam, the faith. In Islamism, I found an ideology, I found an identity, and I found a belonging, exactly as Paul described. And that's where I think we have very similar stories.
Well, this is interesting because, going back to this notion that it's all about ideology, right? It doesn't sound like what we're talking about here is a religious ideology, And so, when we were having lunch yesterday, I asked you, Paul, the question: is there an ideology of the streets? It's not religious, obviously, but can you describe an ideology of the streets that actually sounds similar to Maajid's, or is it really something very different?
It's probably different in the sense that when I first joined the gang, there was a lot of talk and a lot of behavior, the viewpoint of us against the world. Nobody cares about us. All the rich people on top of the hill could care less if we kill each other. It probably benefits them in some sort of way. Why should we obey the law? Just stuff of that nature. Underprivileged. Got to fend for ourselves and maybe even have to rob, cheat, and steal to feed our families, stuff of that nature.
Mm-hmm. I think where the commonalities is the grievances that we experience and the identity crisis that leads to people seeking a belonging in something. And I think that there weren't gangs. I mean, Europe it's not the same as America in that sense. We don't have those armed gangs running around with guns. What we do have instead is a heavy Muslim population. Some say that the blacks of Europe are the Muslims. And then what we have is a situation where in seeking that identity, they're joining extremist organizations. And it's quite a huge problem in Europe, in the UK, and across the continent.
Now, we've gotten at the grievances and the motivational needs that led you, Paul, to join a gang, Maajid, you to join Hizb ut-Tahrir. What about the decision to leave? What were the grievances or motivational needs behind both of your very difficult and potentially life-threatening decisions to leave these organizations, which is something that is damn near impossible for most people?
Let me try to sum this up in about 30 seconds. There was a young kid who kind of idolized me, followed me around, wanted to be like me, and I was kind of mentoring him in the gang. And I remember one particular incident. There was a party in my neighborhood, and a guy from an outside neighborhood tried to stab one of my friends. He didn't know that was our territory, so long story short, we chased him down, and he was getting beat by about 10 guys. And all of a sudden, this kid taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around, and it's a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid holding a turtle. And he says, "Here, hit him with this." And it was just mind-boggling, like, what is this kid doing out at midnight? Why is he offering me his pet turtle to hit this guy with, right? So come to find out, this kid's father had left him when he was 3 years old, started a new family in Mexico. His mother remarried, and his stepdad can't stand him. So the family goes out on, family parties on the weekend, and he stays home by himself. So he was just looking for acceptance. And I tried to convince the younger guys to keep him out of the gang, but he kept begging to be a part of it. So for me, fast forward maybe a year or two later, within a period of a couple of weeks, I found myself getting involved in some organized crime. And this guy kept ending up on my doorstep. And I said, gosh, I got to get away from this guy. How, you know, it's a level up from street gangs, some prison gang stuff. So he was arrested by the feds on a RICO charge. So that kind of helped. I didn't have to worry about him so much. My girlfriend got pregnant. And this young friend of mine was murdered. So I was at a bit of a crossroads. I said, okay, I'm really going to go off the deep end now, because I've never really been that violent. I was more of an organizer in the gang. Each gang member plays different roles. Not every gang member is a killer or a drug dealer. So I was always the organizer. So I said, I'm really going to go off the deep end and, you know, avenge his death, or I'm going to man up and take care of my child, which I always promised myself I would do. So I chose to be a man and take care of my daughter, and that's how it started for me.
Well, in my case, I mean, I yet am able to answer specifically why I took the decision I did, considering what happened in prison. Because most of the people, I mean, at the end of the day, if you've been through torture by electrocution, if you've had your friends die in front of your eyes in prison because they've been tortured, if you've seen 15-year-old boys electrocuted, and mothers electrocuted before their fathers, most people in that situation go from being non-violent extremists, as I was, to becoming terrorists. And I was on the verge of switching when I was in solitary confinement in Egypt to become a violent terrorist. What happened in my case is, whilst we were in prison in Egypt, Amnesty International adopted us as prisoners of conscience. And I had considered Amnesty as the enemy of my people. I had considered human rights as a soft power tool of colonialism to colonize the minds of Muslims and make them subservient to Western values. When Amnesty reached out in that way, for the first time I saw a consistent stance in defense of people who they knew considered them as enemies. And that opened up my heart. And I think where the heart opens, the mind can follow. But secondly, I think very significantly in prison, I was there with those who assassinated the former president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, in 1981. Those who weren't executed in the case were given life sentences. And many of these former jihadists had abandoned their violent ideology through a constant process of discussion and dialogue and engagement with people who were involved in de-radicalization of the prisoners. And those guys then went on to speak to me. Now, initially, I took it upon myself to think that you guys have sold out, you know, prison has made you soft, and it's my purpose to try and reconvince you of the fact that you've basically forgotten who you were. These guys had been in prison since I was, what, about 7, 8 years old. I mean, they had done time. And obviously, over the 4-year process, it was them who managed to change my mind and convince me that, in fact, what I had thought was Islam, my faith, was a very politicized version of Islam. It was exploiting sentiments of grievances and my emotional sentiments to my faith for a political ideology. So upon leaving, a year later, I decided to take that step and start working for human rights reconciliation and counter-extremism, i.e. to prevent people from ever joining extremist groups in the first place. Because I think it's very hard to convince people who've been through torture, or on a macro level, to convince people who've had their countries invaded and civilians have been bombed in front of their eyes. It's very hard to change them once they've been radicalized. But it's a lot easier to capture people who are youth, 60% of the world's population, before they join extremist organizations. And that's where we're working in Pakistan. That's where CBS 60 Minutes followed us there to profile that work. So I think what we're trying to do is stop people ever joining in the first place. Once they've gone down that path, it's very difficult to pull them back. The pressures you spoke about, I mean, it cost me my marriage. My ex-wife, who's a member of the group, I have a son with her. Our marriage ended, and all of the people that used to idolize me as a prisoner of that cause now consider me a traitor. And a couple of times have either threatened or have attacked me in Pakistan. So the pressures to leave these organizations are huge, even if you wanted to leave. And I think the best solution is, let's not bomb people, let's not introduce regressive legislation and Guantanamos and Abu Ghraibs. Let's start preventing the 60% of the world's population from ever joining those groups in the first place. Because once they join, the peer pressures to stop them leaving are so intense. I mean, who's going to want to have their marriage end up in a divorce? I mean, it's not something that every person wants to go through. So I think prevent is better than cure.
Well, I think this is a good opportunity to bring up technology, right? Technology is offers a set of tools that have been distracting young people for decades, and the technology we see today offers a potential to distract young people off the path of recruitment. But if you look at just the spike in technology, right, in the last 10 years, cell phone growth around the world has gone from 907 million to nearly 5 billion. Internet growth from 361 million to nearly 2 billion. But we all know that while technology doesn't choose sides, the people who use it do. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit from the gang context and the radical Islamist context about both the negative sides of how technology is being used, but also where some of the opportunities might be?
Sure. Well, for some of the kids that I work with, most of them have MySpace accounts. I don't know if it's okay to say MySpace, but so and many of their profiles display their gang membership, if not a family member's gang membership. A lot of times there's even altercations that transpire on MySpace and kind of filter out into the streets. Not at an alarming rate, but it does happen. So, you know, promoting of the gang, it helps to recruit members. They kind of add a kid who's kind of wanting to fit in. I see a kid, for example, a kid from South Central LA has a friend in, you know, a suburb area, and he's kind of wanting to be from that gang, and he doesn't live in a poor neighborhood or has the same struggles as the kid from the gang. So just stuff of that nature. It's just I don't know what to do, honestly. You know, the best thing we can try to do is educate the parents, but a lot of times the parents are kind of thinking that it's the thing to do, just let them do what every other kid is doing, but that's not the case. But they do use, I wouldn't say email so much, but text messaging. You know, hey, I just saw this member here, so you know they go looking for the guy through text messaging and MySpace accounts and other social networks that help to promote and recruit.
Maajid, real quick, because then we're going to bring Alberto and Geoffrey back
Well, since this is called Mind Shift, I mean, let's talk about some of the ways in which I think extremist organizations are thinking more innovatively than we are. They're addressing global populations. They're not recognizing national boundaries. Their message is global. Their recruitment is global. And they're using new media in ways. I mean, I was taught how to use the email by the extremist group that I joined at around 17 years old. I didn't know what email was. And they're active on social media. They're using the internet in amazingly efficient ways, considering their resources. And yes, technology is value neutral, so it depends on who's using it and how they use it. But I think we need to be a lot more imaginative as to how we're using that technology to push out counter messages. And we need to stop thinking in a restricted national way. We need to stop thinking of the borders and the impositions we put on our own minds, but start thinking in imaginative and creative ways as to how we can move forward in the future to put out positive messages via using technology and other forms of media, you know, music and will.i.am and some of the work there. And I think it's vital to develop brands and symbols for counter-radicalization. Everyone's heard of bin Laden. Everyone's heard of Al-Qaeda. Who's heard of the positive alternative messages out there to try and challenge those brands? And they are brands. And at the moment, those brands who are challenging them don't have enough attention or branding or symbolism around them to develop that potent counter-message.
Now, let's move on to action and solutions. I'd like to invite Geoffrey and Alberto back to the stage. I think we need 2 more chairs.
Give me some water. Is there water?
Yeah, please. Yeah. Great.
Geoffrey here. Geoffrey, I think you should sit over here.
Come on, Jeff.
Are we okay with the seating like this? Yeah.
However you guys want it.
We'll play musicals.
No. Thank you.
So, Geoffrey, Alberto, you know, you've really heard a challenge framed, you know, across 2 very different contexts, right? And in listening to the challenge that I sort of hear is that radicalization is really about the process by which, you know, illicit actors, you know, hijack impressionable young minds and exploit them for criminal purposes. You know, as people that have worked in the solution space in 2 other different contexts, to our 2 colleagues here, you know, what do you hear as some of the potential problem-solving ideas?
Well, I mean, this has been really fascinating to me because I am amazed at how young people gravitate towards extreme. I mean, both out of curiosity and but if there is an organized message of recruitment, it happens without the adults knowing anything about it, meaning that world exists and the adults aren't really connected to it at all. There are 2 things I found very interesting. One is that one of the places that people know our work the best is in prison. And I was just stunned. I said, people know, I said, oh yeah, Jeff, you're like a hero in there. And the reason is because the prisoners understand if they had been in my program, they probably wouldn't have been in prison. It was clear that I believe a certain set of circumstances led these kids to do these things and end up in this place. And so here they have somebody saying, oh yeah, I know how you ended up there and we're trying to stop you. And in most places there was no adult trying to stop young people when they were at that impressionable age. The second thing is that I have a lot of my young people who are organizing around negative areas using the internet. So we aren't, I told you I'm old, so we're not connected to it, right? But they are, and we don't really know what's going on. The last thing I'll say, just as a potential solution, one of the interesting things that happened when Amex decided to do the commercial and put us on, I have met, and people think it hadn't helped with fundraising and stuff like that. What has happened is I meet people all over the country who say to me, you know what, I am so happy to see that somebody is doing something, because it's the brand issue. It's like there is a brand out there that says there's an answer, and then if there's an answer in Harlem, there's probably an answer in South Central and other things. And that's one of the areas that I think we haven't really exploited. Folks who create brands and really get people identified. I agree with you. Everybody knows Al-Qaeda. I don't know a positive brand, right? If you were to say, so I haven't heard of anything, and the question is why? Because if I'm young and if I'm on the edge, where do I hook into?
You're from New York, yeah?
I'm from New York.
Right, so of course the whole controversy there at the moment with the Park 51 Center. So we're involved in trying to develop a positive message as an alternative. So we discredit the clash of civilizations rhetoric. So many people are pushing out there that Islam and the West are at war with each other. I mean, that's a false paradigm. Huntington's theory is incorrect. The true clash is between and within Muslims fighting for democratic rights versus those who are totalitarian, trying to control the vast majority of Muslims. It's not Muslims versus the West. So on the 6th of October, I mention this because you're from New York, I'm debating a motion. It's an intelligence squared debate organized in New York on the 6th of October. The motion is Islam is a religion of peace. And opposing the motion is one of the most prolific voices who is a critic of Islam, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. But what we're trying to do, and we would like your support for this, is to develop a positive image, because without that positive image, there's nothing for the young people to grab onto, and they will be attracted to the negative brand. And that's what's happening at the moment. So your support would be welcome.
I'd be thrilled to be supportive of this.
Alberto, let me ask you about role models, and then ask both Maajid and Paul and Jeff if you want to comment on it. We spoke yesterday about the importance of role models who can be powerful figures either in shaping negative sentiments or shaping positive sentiments. Do you want to share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I wanted to take up on what Paul was saying before. One of the things we've found is that the mothers of these guys, of these boys, of these young men are incredible. They do everything. They're the mother, they're the father, they're everything, right? Now, there's one problem, that mother needs a father next to her to develop these young men. What tends to happen around 12, 13 years old, the mechanism is that they just go out, they need that male role model, that should be the father. They need the male role model. Who do they go after? They go after a leader. They're not going to go after a loser. They're going to look for the hitman. They're going to look for the drug dealer. They're going to look for the head of the gang. And that's their new role model that they're going to latch onto. And without their even being conscious of it, they enter these gangs, and then they can't help it. Then how do you get out? Once you get in, there's no way out. So for me, one of the programs that should really be sort of worked on is how to rebuild fatherhood. I mean, it sounds corny, but how to rebuild this for these guys. And why do they come to Project Alcatraz? They're looking for that role model, the positive role model. In that case, it's Jimmy, it's myself. And they want to be somebody else. They don't want to be stuck there killing people or trafficking drugs. They're just like all of us. They've got huge potential. They're bright. You've got some geniuses there. And all of that potential is being flushed away. Now,
Maajid, Paul, do you agree with what Alberto's saying? And then can you comment a little bit on, who are some of the positive and negative role models that you saw growing up who could have had either an exacerbating impact on your recruitment or a potential diverting impact on your recruitment?
Please. I'd have to agree with Alberto, and it's similar to what Maajid explained a little while ago. It's extremely difficult to get out once you're in. So there's some similarities there, and also, I mean, for me, it was protection, because even if you don't want to be a gang member, if you live in the neighborhood, the kids from the other side of the street are going to pick on you. So what are your options? Do you not join the gang that you're familiar with and just let these kids beat you, or do you join the gang and then the numbers are kind of even out and maybe they won't pick on you as much? That happens a lot. So a lot of times it's kind of like by force, not by choice. Kind of choosing the less of two evils, and it's hard. It's extremely difficult. But I think that father figure is key. Looking for somebody to kind of aspire to be, the power, the respect, the love, or what have you. The unfortunate thing is that gang members, young gang members, don't realize the consequences that come with that decision until it's too late, until they're deep into the gang, full of tattoos, in prison, and then it's like, oh my gosh, what the heck did I just do?
Maajid, and then we'll come back to you, Alberto.
So there's actually another overlap between us, which is statistically in the US, so many prisoners who are in prison for gang-related offenses are converting to a radical interpretation of Islam. And they're doing that because they're angry. So what we have at the moment is the demand for an extreme message out there that people are joining on the ground. There is no demand being created for a positive message. And I think that when I joined at 16, it's really sad to say that you'd think it's one of the biggest problems in the world, not just in the States. Islamist radicalization is one of the biggest problems. There was no positive role model that I could look to and say, I'm going to channel my anger in this direction. I only had the negativity in front of me saying, you're oppressed, you're downtrodden, look at Bosnia, look at what happens to Muslims in Europe. So join us, be angry, and cause revolution in the world. And that's what we quite literally did. We had members of armies recruited to our group attempting military coups in countries like Pakistan. They were arrested in 2003. People that I recruited had their backs broken in torture. It's just anger after anger after anger. And I think that it's sad to say that at the moment there is no prominent and visible positive alternatives. We're using music, we're using arts and culture, we're using democratic messages to try and get young people to once again make it as unfashionable as communism has become to join Al-Qaeda, and to try and make the democratic message and pluralism and tolerance and respect something that's trendy and fashionable to be associated with. Salman over there, he's a good friend, he's helping. We need other musicians, other artists, all of us in a coalition to try and make the positive role model attractive once again.
Our red light is on, so we do need to finish up. And I'm going to give Maajid and Paul the last words here, but let me frame something for you before you do that, because I want you to address your last words at the audience. Again, going back to the spirit of Zeitgeist being a place of action. You listen to scholars who are experts on radicalization and gangs. You look at what the media tells us. You look at even what government's trying to do. They all tell us it's a battle for the hearts and minds of young people, right? But the question we have is it really, when I hear you both speak, when I hear Geoffrey, you, when I hear Alberto, you as well, it sounds to me like it's less a battle for the hearts and minds and it's more a challenge of alternatives. So given that it's a challenge of alternatives, you have a whole audience of people here that know how to build things. They build applications, they build programs, they build things that actually for commercial purposes have that natural effect of diverting at-risk young people away from recruitment. What should all these people do? What's your call to action for all of them?
I would say it has to be a comprehensive, collaborative approach, similar to what we're trying to do with the Better LA in Los Angeles, and people have to come to the table with what Will.i.am discussed earlier and the stuff that he's doing. The amazing work that Geoffrey's doing in education, that's a big component of it. And then what Alberto's doing, and it's similar to working with extremists. The administration used to have an approach of we won't sit at the table with anybody who's on this list as a terrorist. Well, we have the approach where, now the new administration says we'll sit down and have a dialogue for peace with anybody that's willing to sit down and have a dialogue. And that's what we do with gang members. If they're willing to sit down and talk and say, how can we work this out, provide you with some jobs, tattoo removal, get you out of the situation that you're in, then let's do it.
Maajid?
I tour Pakistan. I've spoken to over 10,000 students who are vulnerable to joining some of the more angry organizations in that country. And what I would request to everyone here is help me create this as a brand. I mean, this is one of the most significant civilizational challenges of our time. And we need to develop positive role models. We need to create a self-sustaining model. And that requires artists, cultural figures. It requires businessmen to come in and help me create this as a sustaining brand. Because in Pakistan at the moment, we're trying to launch this nationwide movement to promote democratic values and challenge extremism. But the problem we're having is, of course, when you talk about challenging extremism, it's many people want to step back because they're worried about being targeted, quite legitimately so. But we need to be as brave as those people who are willing to risk death and torture and imprisonment for angry ideas. And we should be just as willing to risk and sacrifice all of that for our own convictions. So my challenge to everyone would be to help me develop this brand. We're working day in, day out to try and do this, but we're lacking resources and we're lacking that self-sustaining model.
Maajid, Paul, Jeff, Alberto, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,